Argentina's inflation has plummeted from over 200% to under 30%, and President Javier Milei is being hailed as an economic savior. The media is calling it a miracle, Argentina's transformation from ruin to riches. But if that's true, why has emigration surged by 50.6% in just 1 year? And why do 85% of young Argentines still want to leave? I've been living in Buenos Aires for a few months now, and the reality here is nothing like what the headlines say. My local friend, every 3 months, he crosses into Chile. Not for work, not for fun, just to buy basics. Phones, appliances, even food. It's all way cheaper there, and lately he's been asking himself, why not just move? If even Argentines are questioning whether it's worth staying, what does that even say about this country? The numbers tell a clear story. According to INDEC, Argentina's national statistics agency, emigration has surged by 50.6% in just 1 year. At the same time, arrivals have dropped by 8.4%. More people are leaving Argentina now than at any other point in recent history. And this trend, it's not slowing down under President Javier Milei's administration.
I am scared. I feel disgusted and it makes me sad, but I won't hide because I'm scared. We have always existed in different ways under all kinds of governments, but to see Nazism rise to power is very difficult to watch and truly terrifying.
The most alarming part, it's the young people. A staggering 85.1% of Argentines under 25 say they want to leave. That's not just an economic issue. It's a brain drain that could cripple the country's future. Just look at Japan. A rapidly aging population has led to severe economic stagnation, and yet Argentina could be on track for something even worse. Maria is one of those young professionals feeling trapped by this crisis. She's a teacher in Buenos Aires. Just a few years ago, she was comfortably middle class, but today, she's struggling to afford even the basics. Argentina's economy is supposedly stabilizing, but for the people living there, reality's far from stable. Inflation, though slowing, is still among the highest in the world. Prices keep rising, salaries aren't keeping up, and everyday life is becoming more unaffordable by the month. At its peak, inflation in Argentina soared past 200%, wiping out savings, crushing businesses, and making even the most basic necessities feel like luxury items. Today, it has dropped to under 30%, but the damage is already done. The peso has lost so much value that wages have effectively shrunk overnight. Imagine working the same job, the same hours, but your paycheck is now worth 40% less. That's the reality millions of Argentines are facing. But Argentina's economic problems don't stop at inflation. The country's drowning in debt, 110.5% of its GDP. That's how much Argentina now owes. To put that into perspective, that's more debt than the entire value of the goods and services the country produces in a year. Now, thanks to a decision by the US Supreme Court, things just got worse. In 2024, creditors were granted the right to seize over $300 million from Argentina's overseas accounts. That money wasn't just numbers in a ledger. It was part of Argentina's dwindling foreign reserves, crucial for stabilizing the economy and paying for imports. This means Argentina has even fewer resources to buy essential goods from abroad, things like medicine, fuel, and technology. It means the government has less room to stabilize the peso or invest in critical infrastructure. And for the ordinary people, it means prices stay high, wages stay low, and economic uncertainty only deepens. The crisis isn't just theoretical. It's visible in every store, in every transaction, in every paycheck that doesn't stretch as far as it used to. Foreign goods especially are absurdly expensive. If you want to buy an iPhone here, be prepared to pay between $2,000 and $2,500 US. Not only is that double the price of what someone in the US would pay for, it's also around 4 months of Maria's salary as a teacher. And it's not just luxury items. Import restrictions and inflation means that even basic electronics, clothing, and food staples cost significantly more than they should. Behind every statistic, there's a person struggling to make ends meet. And right now, that struggle is more widespread than ever. 53% of Argentines now live below the poverty line. That's more than half the population. And it's not just individuals who are struggling. Argentina's public services are collapsing under economic strain. Healthcare systems, once a source of pride, are now underfunded underfunded, with hospitals facing medicine shortages and long wait times. Schools are struggling too. Budget cuts have left many institutions without the resources they need to operate effectively. The combination of inflation, debt, poverty, and collapsing services isn't just a temporary hardship. It's creating a country where survival, rather than progress, is the new normal. And for many Argentines, that's a future they're not willing to accept. For decades, Buenos Aires has been the economic heart of Argentina, but today, more and more people are being pushed to its outskirts, not by choice, but by necessity. Rent in the city center has become unaffordable for many working-class families. Inflation, stagnant wages, and the rising costs of living mean that staying in Buenos Aires is simply no longer an option for thousands of people. As a result, they're moving further away from the city, seeking cheaper housing. But this forced migration comes at a cost. Longer commutes, reduced job opportunities, and a growing divide between those who can afford to live near the city and those who can't. For those people who can't afford formal housing, there's only one option: the Barrios Populares, Argentina's rapidly growing informal settlements. These neighborhoods, built on the outskirts of Buenos Aires, lack basic infrastructure, running water, and proper sanitation. Here, families live in makeshift homes, often constructed from scrap materials, without access to stable electricity or healthcare, and the population in these areas is exploding. As people move further from Buenos Aires, the daily commute becomes a financial burden as much as a time drain. For Maria, since she moved out of the center, her bus route now costs $3, the same amount that she makes in an hour. With public transportation costs soaring, some people have no choice but to walk hours to their jobs or risk spending most of their wages just getting to work. The further you live from the city, the harder it is to find stable employment, and the worse the cycle of poverty becomes. Underemployment is rising as a result. People who want to work full-time simply cannot afford to commute to where the jobs are. When President Javier Milei took office, he promised radical economic reforms, cuts to public spending, a smaller government, and a more efficient economy. Supporters argue these changes were necessary to stop Argentina's financial collapse, but the reality on the ground is very different. Austerity has sparked mass protests across the country. Clashes between demonstrators and security forces have turned violent as frustrations grow over the harsh economic conditions ordinary Argentines are now facing. And nowhere is this struggle more visible than in the collapse of Argentina's healthcare system. Public hospitals, once a source of national pride, are now at a breaking point. Budget cuts have left facilities without basic supplies. Doctors and nurses are being forced to work under deteriorating conditions, and entire medical programs are being defunded. Staff at El Hospital Pediatrico Garajan, Argentina's largest pediatric hospital, describe their situation as financial suffocation. They're running out of critical medications, delaying treatments, and struggling to provide care to the country's most vulnerable patients. The situation is just as dire for Argentina's free HIV/AIDS treatment program, which was once one of the most advanced in Latin America. Funding for it has fallen by 67% in real terms, with another projected cut of 46% in 2025. Doctors warn that thousands of patients may lose access to life-saving medication as a result. For many Argentines, healthcare is no longer a right. It's becoming a privilege. Emergency rooms are turning people away. Patients are waiting months for basic treatment. In some hospitals, they're running out of syringes, antibiotics, and even painkillers. And in the informal settlements outside Buenos Aires, where clinics are shutting down completely, access to medical care is vanishing altogether. Families who relied on public hospitals for routine care are now left with no options. Milei's economic policies were meant to fix Argentina's financial crisis, but for many, especially the poorest, they've only made daily life harder. With hospitals failing, medication shortages, and essential services disappearing, people are left wondering, where is the recovery they were promised? And for those who can't afford to keep up, their only option is to leave. Argentina isn't just experiencing an economic crisis, it's in the middle of a political war. The country is deeply divided between extreme left and right-wing factions, locked in a struggle that has paralyzed institutions, sparked violent protests, and shattered public trust in the government. This divide, known as La Grieta, is more than just political differences. It's an identity crisis. For decades, Argentina has swung between radically different economic economic policies, leaving citizens trapped in cycles of reform, collapse, and reform again. And under Milei's administration, the divide has only deepened. Between January and June 2024, Argentina witnessed a wave of protests against Milei's economic policies. What began as demonstrations quickly turned into violent clashes. Tensions boiled over on June 12, 2024, when security forces deployed tear gas and water cannons on protesters gathered outside Congress. The crackdown was swift. 33 people were arrested, charged with crimes against constitutional order. Human rights organizations have raised alarms, warning that Argentina is dangerously close to criminalizing dissent. What started as frustration over economic hardship is turning into something far more volatile, a battle for the country's future. Political instability isn't just playing out in government buildings, it's spilling onto the streets. Greater Buenos Aires is seeing its worst crime wave in decades. In 1 month alone, 35 homicides were recorded, the highest number in over 20 years. For everyday Argentines, life is becoming more dangerous by the day. Theft, carjackings, and violent assaults are on the rise, and what's worse? Police forces, stretched thin and underfunded, are struggling to keep up. Imagine working all day, only to come home to find your car, something that's been in your family for generations because replacing it's too expensive, vandalized and destroyed in the latest wave of protests. And for some, that's not even the worst of it. Last week, Maria's neighbor was robbed in broad daylight. Yesterday, she saw a vandalized car outside her apartment. For the first time in her life, she feels unsafe. Argentina has always been a country built on agriculture. Its exports, soy, beef, and grain have long been a major source of revenue. But recent government policies are threatening to destabilize this crucial sector. In an attempt to boost short-term profits, Milei's administration has temporarily reduced agricultural export taxes. This move is meant to encourage production and bring in much-needed foreign currency. But while farmers may benefit in the short term, the long-term risks are massive. Export taxes are one of the government's biggest revenue streams. Cutting them means less money for infrastructure, education, and essential services. And in a country already battling debt and economic collapse, can Argentina really afford another financial gamble? Despite everything, despite the protests, the inflation, the exodus, there is, at least on paper, a reason for hope. The World Bank predicts that Argentina's economy could grow by 5% in 2025. Government measures have slowed inflation to below 3% per month, with annual inflation expected to fall below 30% next year. It's a promising sign, but the real question is, will it be enough? Because while Argentina's economy might be stabilizing on paper, life for its people is a different story. Wages are still lagging, crime is rising, and thousands of people pack their bags, convinced that the future looks brighter somewhere else. But Argentina is more than its economy. It's a country with a soul, a culture so rich, so passionate, that even in the worst of times, it refuses to fade. But for many Argentines, resilience is no longer enough. Not for Maria. She's made up her mind. She's packing, and in a few months, she'll be gone. Just one of thousands making the same decision. So, would you stay or would you leave? Let me know down below. And if you found this deep dive interesting, subscribe for more global socio-economic analysis, because Argentina's story isn't over yet.